Okay, Senate Revenue Committee will come to order. The first bill up for our consideration is Senate File 104, and the bringer of the bill asked that we go ahead and table the bill. She's been working on amendments to try to fix this bill and hasn't been able to get there quite yet. So in the absence of an objection, I will go ahead and table this bill. Hearing none, laid back. Sorry. So Senate File 104 has been laid back. So the next bill up for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 3, Property Tax Exemption for the Elderly and Infirm. Senator Dockstader. Oh, I'm sorry. Judy, could you do the roll real quick? I'm sorry.
Senator French.
Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McEwen.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Chairman Beitman.
Here. Thank you. Okay. Senator Dockstader, could you walk us through the bill, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Wyman, committee members of the committee. Thank you for hearing Senate Joint Resolution 3. Members of the committee, this is a piece of legislation that we heard in committee on the floor and in the second committee in another part of the building last year, and it passed in all three places with some amendments. We were trying to find solutions at that time to what we saw as a problem that wasn't going to go away, and it's simply escalated over the summer months. This comes from a big thick binder, a 3-inch binder, which I appreciate the Department of Revenue helping me put together, collecting all the pieces of legislation that have been considered and failed over the last few years. The last time all of it was being considered was back along 2006, 2007, because we had the same situation. But Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it was limited to kind of a 2-county area out in the west. And the rest of the state wasn't feeling the challenges those 2 counties were had, so it was hard to get the legislation through. But I compiled all those with the good help of the Department of Revenue. They went through the files, which I really appreciated. We put that together. The solution back then, 2008, was the Great Recession. Everything kind of collapsed inward, and all the property tax problems went away. Well, here we are now, post-COVID, with incredible property taxes, but this time it's not a 2-county area. All of you are experiencing it across the state, and so I just want to thank the whole state for sharing the love with us this time around, because hopefully we'll get a little more ahead in finding a solution. The property tax notices that went out this year were shocking. So I pulled this one out along with another one that we considered at a later date and looked for who I might help first. I heard most of all from my seniors. They felt like they were in trouble to keep their homes because these bills were coming in and they didn't have that discretionary income to take care of these property tax notices. Our infirm, who are working very difficult jobs, and everybody tries to make a living, and this isn't to degrade anyone, but our people in the service industry in our area commuting sometimes 2 to 3 hours a day to work, and all of a sudden they get these property tax notices that are beyond what they can do. So we brought this resolution back both last year and this year to consider, as you see in section 1, Mr. Chairman, new section 21 proposed for submission to the electors of the state of Wyoming, the next general election for approval or rejection, become valid as part of the next constitution. We'd have to put it in the next election because it's amendment to the Constitution. In Article 15, Section 21, the provisions are that residential property may be exempt from taxation to preserve home ownership in Wyoming for the elderly and the infirm, and also to provide for residential property to be exempt from taxation in whole or in part as it determines necessary for the purpose of this section. So a lot of that would be sorted out in the following piece of legislation. This simply allows us to put it on the ballot. Section 2, again, necessary to preserve home ownership for the elderly and the infirm and the support of the poor. There is some cost when you go on to the ballot, and you see that in the fiscal note, $44,000 for this resolution because it's a statutory publication, and you can also see that there's what it costs per line. my understanding, we've got some concerns over what's elderly in the infirm, and I'm open to discussing, further defining that, but those are the people first and foremost I wanted to help, because they seem to be in that fixed income area where they just don't have the discretionary funds to address what's happening with their property tax notices. So with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, I bring you Senate Joint Resolution 3.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Any questions? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dockstader. Yeah, on the elderly and infirm, is there can you define that? Elderly, is that anybody who's met the Social Security 66 and a half or 67 age, or the infirm? I mean, can you define that a little more for me, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator French, I would be open to amending to say it starts at 66 or a particular age where we say at this point you're considered for this property tax break.
Senator Dockstader, I'm okay with leaving elderly and infirm in the Constitution and then letting the legislature define
Further
those
define, yeah.
terms, because they may change. And if you need to change them, it's easier to change them in statute than it would be in the Constitution. Would you be open to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. That allows us to go into the weeds and get it taken care of through statute.
Is there any other questions? Seeing none, you're off the hook for now, but stick around just in case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Anybody wish to testify? Yes, Mr. Moline, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting firmly in support of this resolution. The agricultural industry is one of the fastest aging industries in the nation. Young people aren't coming back. And quite often what happens is that people that need help don't qualify under other programs. Their income is a little too high. And I realize there's a lot of details that'll have to be worked out. I do appreciate that the statement that we would work this out through legislation rather than through the constitutional amendment. Those are details we'll have to work out later, but this is important to my membership as they age. And I will make this comment that 10 years ago, what seemed elderly is a lot different to me than what it is now, as I've hit some milestones. With that, Mr. Chairman, sitting in support of this resolution, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Seeing none, thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Anybody else wish to testify on Senate Joint Resolution 3? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I want to start off by saying that we certainly respect that there's an issue we have to address to provide relief to certain people in our state. Elderly infirm is one of those categories that's worthy of consideration, and certainly there are others that should be a part of that. I did want to express that we've established a position of opposition, but that's not a hard and fast position. As you heard from the good senator, my members have a little bit of concern about what exactly qualifies as elderly and infirm. And if Mr. Moline thinks he's elderly, I don't think he's elderly. So I respect that that might be something that we would define in statute, but we would prefer that that happen on the front end so that we have a little bit of better understanding of what we might be talking about relative to this particular resolution and what that could mean 3 years from now when we might go to implement that should the electors elect to move forward with this particular amendment. So if we could certainly solve that issue or give us some better certainty and clarity around that, that would be one thing. Mr. Chairman, actually last year, when Senator Dockstader, then President Dockstader, brought this bill forward, we actually supported the constitutional amendment that he brought at that time. And one of the things that we were impressed with that particular legislation is that he had included a provision that said essentially that the legislature shall reimburse local governments for the exemptions that you might provide. Now, that was favorable to us because it gave us some certainty that we weren't going to be shouldering the burden for a decision that we didn't get to make other than being able to participate in this process. So I'd certainly request that you might consider that sort of language relative to this bill as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, we do want to be a partner in yours in trying to figure this conundrum out. We'll have some opposition points. We'll have some places where we're supportive and certainly try and figure out how we can get the relief where it's most needed in this process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you sort of pinpoint the biggest concerns? I mean, is it just loss of revenue? Is that the primary concern? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be able to provide you a bit more of a presentation in the conversation we had this morning of what the impacts and how important property taxes are to your local governments, in particular for me, the counties. Certainly Senator French understands that really well. And so we'll be able to bring that forward. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, we are concerned with being able to continue to provide the services that are demanded out of counties at the local level. We're not trying to get rich. We're not trying to pile on. But at this point in time, nobody's saying that their roads are smooth enough and that the ambulance gets there on time and that, you know, all the rest of the stuff that we're responsible for providing. So just trying to make sure we can provide services.
You good? All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Former Representative Schwartz. Good to see you. Welcome to Senate Revenue.
Thank you. My name is Andy Schwartz. I am officially representing the town of Jackson. I think my comments will be a little broader. I get concerned. I'm supportive of the resolution. I think the elderly and the firm, depending how we define it, certainly need assistance. But the problem is much deeper than that, and particularly in my community. Personally, my property tax has gone up 200% in 3 years. Where the other piece of the problem really is hitting us is our workforce, because we're reaching the point where even the workforce can't afford their property tax. So while I support this resolution, I agree with Mr. Ryman about the impacts to the revenue streams, but it's also, I want to make sure you realize it doesn't address the entire problem and that there are other things we will need to do to address it. Now, stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Schwartz? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to testify? Anybody on Zoom, Judy? Okay. Seeing no more public comment. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Has been moved by Senator McEwen, seconded by Senator Ide. Discussion committee. Pretty straightforward. Hearing any amendments? Oh, one comment from Senator Ide, or McEwen, Senator McEwen.
Senator somebody.
Senator somebody.
I would just like to say I really like where this is headed for one reason, and I think it is our job on the floor as legislators to move the bar up and down. And I think it's important that we have that flexibility rather than lock something in and then end up with something that's untenable later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any more comments? Do I hear the question? Question being called. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Excuse me, Senator French,
Aye. Senator
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Chairman Biteman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 5 ayes on Senate Joint Resolution 3.
Okay, Senate Joint Resolution 3 has passed the Senate Revenue Committee. The next bill up for our consideration will be Senate File 90, Wyoming Property Tax Relief Authority. Thank you, Senator Dockstetter. This bill is sponsored by Senator Case. I see him here. Come on up. Oh, the great former chairman of Revenue. Welcome back to your old stomping ground, sir. Hopefully we can do this committee justice for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good to see you. Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that I kind of worked on during the interim. I mentioned it to the interim revenue committee a couple of times. I think I shared an earlier draft with them. What this is it kind of tags on a current concept that we have. We have something called the Property Tax Deferral Program. And what that does is allow a taxpayer to go to their county and to request participation in a deferral program that in essence would allow them to defer their taxes to a future date, possibly when their home is sold. We've also found that not many people use that program. I think part of the reason people don't use the program is counties don't really like it. There's that part. But also people don't like to go to the government and say, I can't pay my taxes, and you go on the tax list and then there's a lien put on your property and things, and it's got this government aspect. You got to go to your assessor and your county commissioner. So I was trying to think about this, and the one thing that comes to mind with respect to property taxes in Wyoming is that an increase in property tax is matched by a significant increase in the value of your home. So if you have, let's just pretend like your property tax goes up $1,000 in a year. And that, what does that mean about the underlying value of your home? If we believe a little bit in the market value system and the camera system that they use, we have a couple of ratios that drive this. One is the assessment ratio, which is 9.5%. And then the other one is the number of mills, which are the fractional amount in thousands that apply to your property. So for example, if you had a 9.5% assessment ratio times 80 mills in your county, and then we do the math on this, what that really means is that if your property taxes go up by $1,000, then the value of your home has gone up by almost $132,000. That's the rough math. So that's one thing that comes to mind, is that we have people that are trapped and don't have the ability to pay their property taxes. No question about that, especially elderly people, especially people that lived in their home for a long time and have had their value. They live in nice places perhaps, and their value has gone up. But the values have gone up all over Wyoming. That piece of ratio keeps coming back to talk to me about. The truth is the value of their house has gone up also, but there's no way that they can do anything about that. It's the old land rich and cash poor, which a lot of us get into. And I was wondering if there might be a way to do something with those basic math that just hit you in the face without getting the county government and the assessor and everybody involved in that. So I thought of this program. And in explaining this bill, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is just jump to page 15 of the bill. Because the first part of the bill is all about setting up this authority and about bonds and how the governor makes the appointments and everything about that. And I think that's definitely one way to do it, standalone way. It might be possible to give this to another agency that already exists. It's possible. So let's set the first part down for a minute and just go to page 15. And this is the 97307. We're creating the property tax loan program. At the bottom of the page, the property tax loan program is hereby created. The authority, and that's that first part, shall manage the program in accordance with the following. And these Romanettes on page 16, Romanet I, the authority shall use funds collected from the issuance of bonds and gifts and whatever they get to provide loans to homeowners who require assistance with paying property taxes as a result of an increase in the amount of property tax owed by the homeowner on the homeowner's primary residence. Romanet 2 talks about how the homeowner seeks a loan. And the way I envision this working, Mr. Chairman, is that the government not do this themselves. We contract with banks. People go to banks and credit unions to get the loans. And the banks and credit unions administer the loans for us. So Romanet 2, any homeowner seeking a loan under this program shall submit an application on a form provided the authority. Application may be made to the authority or to a financial institution participating in a loan program. Loans issued shall not exceed the amount of the property tax on the homeowner's primary residence for the current year. But I will note that a little bit later on, we allow for cumulative, so that you could kind of have a home equity line of credit that would allow you to stay in your home, pay your taxes every year, maybe go back to the bank and get a draw, but that is the way the program would work. We specified the interest at the bottom. The interest charged on each loan issued under this article shall be the current equivalent yield of a United States Treasury security loan of the same duration. So it should be a pretty good rate. Even treasuries are up a little bit now. And then lines 4 through 6, the authority may authorize an applicant to receive subsequent loans as a line of credit. And A talks about the amount of credit that can be issued. It's all tied back to the property tax over all those years. And B, starting on page 14, talks about the repayment program, but it's good for 10 years. The repayment term would not be more than 10 years. But it does say an applicant seeking future loans, additional time to repay a loan or on a line of credit shall reapply as required by the authority after 10 years. So maybe you could reapply. Now, there may be other sources of funds available to you, but you could reapply after 10 years. Bottom of page 17, if you are doing the line of credit, you just have to do an annual certification of the need for a property tax loan. Loan proceeds shall be dispersed directly to the recipient and used only for the loans recipient's property taxes due on the primary resident. But they're not going and the state's not paying their taxes. We're not writing the check to the county. We give these people the dignity. They're going to pay their taxes as far as their county government knows, and maybe their neighbors know. They went down and wrote the check to the assessor. Now, there will be a lien on the property from the bank, but it's a lien that is, it's not a superior lien. It's just a current lien. And it would be only for the amount of the property taxes, right? So it's not really going to be a big, huge obstacle lien. And if that lien had to be, you had to make another filing next year as they went into their home equity line of credit, that would work. So we're authorizing, and starting on page 21, we're authorizing financial institutions to participate in the property tax loan program under this article. And they make an application, and basically the authority approves them to be kind of agents or co-loan originators, and the banks can keep 1%. Maybe that needs to be higher. These aren't going to be the biggest loans in the world, but we could make it really easy application process easy, and get this going. We also have a requirement to make people know about this. This is the lines 11 through 15 on page 19. The authority in each financial institution participating shall advertise the property tax loan program in a form that, with the discretion of the authority, is likely to attract the attention of most Wyoming residents possible. And then we bring in a title from the revenue statutes, WS 39-13-104A, and we amend that. There's a lot of language there, but the red language on page 20 is the only amendment to that language. That whole oath and everything, that is current law. So the red, you may not have it in red, but it's underlined language, lines 14 through 17. And it's just directing that any assessment issued under this paragraph shall contain information, including contact information of any property tax relief program authorized by state law. So that when a person gets their assessment notice, they'll learn about the relief, this and other relief programs. That's basically the bill. There is a $100,000 appropriation to get it started. The whole front part of the bill is about creating this authority and the fact that the authority can issue bonds. The appointments are made by the governor. The people that serve on the authority, they have the kind of the compensation that we use as the standard legislative kind of compensation. And I'm not expecting that the authority would do much, but it would have the authority to issue bonds. The bonds would be tax-free bonds, but they would not be obligations of the state of Wyoming. But they would allow that bond money to be used to give to people to pay their property taxes through the program. I do think that probably could find a home for this somewhere in state government and wouldn't need to create a new authority. We talked a lot in drafting this about maybe leaving if that could be done in the bill title. But if the idea is to get people thinking here, and we could take the private banks out of it because these are kind of small potato loans, I suppose, but they might want to do it as a service. And remember, banking includes credit unions, other financial institutions. It'd be more like a service to their customers. They'd get a little bit for it, but not much. But when you think of the math, okay, about how the value of the home way exceeds the increase in the property taxes, but it's a quandary. People don't have the cash value. And this would be an easy way for the state to front the money, basically, so they can pay their taxes, guaranteed to get paid back. The bonds will be safe. Banks can help connect with their customers and provide a service if they desire to. And we end up getting taxes paid. I heard the discussion from the counties. They get paid, and people stay in their homes. That's the bill.
Well, thank you, Senator Case, for that. That was a good explanation. I had a question on page 16, line 15, where we're talking about the current tax year. Did you contemplate those folks that may be multiple years delinquent, that they might be able to get
It's
a
a
loan?
great idea, Mr. Chairman.
Get a loan to just pay that all off and get current so they can stay in their home without being penalized?
I did not contemplate that, but I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
If you got people, that are in arrears, because of the lien on the property, it's still a good loan. Thank you. That's a good catch. We can
Okay.
do something with that.
Any other questions? Yeah, we'll do to Senator French and then Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case, couple of things. If you don't pay your property taxes, it's written up in the paper and it comes up for public sale, I believe, within a year. So, and then somebody can buy that, and I think you have up to, I want to say 7 years to get current before the property transfers over to whoever paid those property taxes. It's along those lines. What happens, and you may have mentioned it, and forgive me if you have, if somebody gets a loan to pay their property taxes, and then they, a month later, sell their house and move to another state and skip out on paying that loan. What happens then? And forgive me if you mentioned it.
Senator
Mr.
Case.
Mr. Chairman, when they receive the loan, the lender will also put a lien on their house. So there will be a statement when the title search goes to look into that transfer of property, they'll have to satisfy that or they won't get clear title. So, and you were correct in kind of the procedure for, once you get delinquent, your name goes on a list and you hang in that list. I think it's actually for more than a year. And then when your property's not really sold, usually it's a lottery process that occurs at the courthouse where someone pays your taxes for you. And now you have an obligation to that person that paid the property taxes for you. That's, and I actually don't think it even waits a year when I think about it. But your taxes get paid, but get paid by some third party that's come in. And now you have to pay them back, or after a certain amount of time, they can pursue to actually get clear title to the property. And it takes several years, but it's expensive because they're charging, I think they get 18%, if I remember right, it's by statute. I bet someone in real estate probably knows a lot about that. Yeah, yeah.
I had a question. Senator McEwen?
Senator Case, I'm trying to wrap my mind around kind of one of the downsides to this.
Mhm.
What happens when I have 2 or 3 loans or even 1 loan and I default on my property tax loan? And then we're gonna complicate the matter with a private-public relationship. What's the disposition of the property when that happens? Thank you, Senator Case.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Chairman, probably the amount of the loan and is probably going to be modest. I mean, modest to a homeowner. Let's say it's $10,000, okay? So there's a delinquency and you have a security interest and there's a delinquency of 10,000, which I think would be on the high side, but we can use that. So I suppose it is possible for that to pursue a foreclosure, but the truth is if there are other interests, financial interests, it's all going to get satisfied. I doubt if a foreclosure would ever come forward. I bet Senator Ide probably could think about that, what would be likely to happen there more than even I can. But I have a hard time believing that something will go to foreclosure over an amount that's relatively small compared to the value of the property. And there may be other lien holders that they may be junior or senior, and that's probably where the action is going to happen with the foreclosure, I would imagine. But the state can afford to be very patient. That property will never, unless it goes to court and everything's discharged and the state loses out, we would get our money. And so how often would that happen? Not very often, I don't think. I think this would be a pretty safe program.
Any other questions? Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case. I guess the first thought that comes to mind is encouraging somebody to go into debt to pay, their property taxes. I guess that's the first one, when they're probably elderly or, somewhat incapacitated to earn a living, possibly. And I think that there's other tools out there. I mean, whether you agree with them or not, I don't know if I do, like reverse mortgages and something in the private sector that kind of leaves the state out of getting into the business with bonds and loans and that sort of thing. So I like the work you've done here. I think it's great that you're coming up with some ideas here. As you know, as a legislator, you're always looking for the pitfalls on where or to look for the slippery slope of some of it. So the 1%, is that just incentive for the bank to, get involved in their community and sort of help out with struggling property tax payers, so to speak? Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chairman.
commenting, if I may, on your previous, Mr. Chairman. Reverse mortgages, they are a tool that's out there, but they've sure got a bad rep, and people will kind of get caught on the backside of that. It sounds pretty good up front before the obligations are very big, and then, but people tend to dip into them. This, in a way, protects people from debt because you could only go in debt the amount of your increase in property taxes. You can't go in debt you can't get a reverse mortgage and then decide you're taking the whole family to Hawaii and you're going to get a new car. And that happens to people. Stuff happens. They like to do stuff for their children, but the residual value of the home just disappears with that. The only disappearance of debt, the only debt, it's modest, and it's limited to the property tax obligation, and it is protected by that, the great leverage of the value of the house being so many more times than, I suppose a person could get in trouble though, because they could use the increased value of their house and get the property tax loan, but what's going to get them in trouble is the reverse mortgage. Yeah.
Real quick follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, yeah, I'm not a proponent of reverse mortgage. I was just sort of throwing that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, it's one of those things that sounds good on paper, but we sure get a lot of people messed up with them.
Any other questions for the good senator? Yeah, Senator McEwen.
Is there somewhere in here I'm not reading, or maybe it doesn't exist, where there's going to be a guarantee on the loan? And the reason I ask that question is, if we do a partnership with a private bank, most of the loans there are now either VA, FHA, some type of guaranteed payback. I mean, I think even SBA loans now, most of the conservative banks I know of aren't really giving out many conventional loans. And I would hope that, I don't think it's your intent. I don't think we're headed to that type program, are we, Senator Case, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the loans in this program would be underwritten by bonds issued by the authority. And they are tax exempt bonds, so investors would be able to pick up those bonds and tax exempt. And that's becoming more attractive as interest rates go up, actually. But they're not obligations of the state of Wyoming. They're issued by the authority. We have other similar authorities that issued bond that aren't state obligations. They're not obligations of our government. Those bonds, though, would be available to use for the funds, and as if there are defaults, they'd be part of that pool, and we would have interest that would be coming back. So I think the default rate would be pretty small because we're loaning to the most secure people in America, homeowners. We're only loaning by an amount issued to equal to the marginal taxes. And so there may be some defaults, but they'd be recovered from the bonds and any income that came off of other lenders.
So Senator Case, it sounds like the only possible downside on the risk front would be, like you mentioned, the fair market value if that were to ever collapse.
True.
But the intriguing part of this is the bonds, the municipal bonds, the munis, the tax exempt bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a revenue source for the state of Wyoming, or would that interest just be reinvested in the program?
Yes, sir.
In the program?
Yeah.
Okay.
I considered, Mr. Chairman, kind of crossed the bridge. Should we allow the state to invest in this program with our permanent funds? We didn't do that. So these are standalone from other state funds.
Okay. Any other questions for the senator? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anybody want to testify on this bill? I see Mr. Moline. Come on down, sir. The elderly Mr. Moline, without his walker. You're moving well, sir.
Mr. Chairman, committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'm assuming the weather's not going to change drastically, hence my ability to move. Sitting in support of this, of this piece of legislation, I really appreciate that it's a bonding authority, that it's not going to be a direct obligation of the state. It'd only be the startup cost. It's very limited in scope. It would only be, as the Senator Case outlined, it would only be on an increase in property taxes. And I believe through the application process, much as any other loan, there'd probably be some safeguards that if people can't pay it back, you don't make the loan. That's an assumption on my part. That's typically how these things work. If you can't, which doesn't get them out of the problem that they're in, but there's probably other compounding problems there. So I think there's some safeguards built in, but I really appreciate that it's not a direct obligation of the state. Some short-term help, probably be limited scope, limited use. It could be something that's very important on a short-term basis. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions, sitting in support of the bill.
Oh, thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Moline? You get off easy here, Mr. Moline.
Thanks for being nice to an old man.
All right, we're nice to our elderly folk here. Anybody else wish to testify on this bill? Anybody else? Anybody on Zoom, Judy? All right, public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Senator Pappas. Have a second? I'll second it for discussion purposes. Any comments or amendments? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be in favor of voting for this today. Just what I think is maybe good. I'm new here, as I always say, but it's good to see all the ideas. I mean, we need to see ideas and get them out for debate. And there's a lot coming at us, and you need time later, in the evenings and the mornings to study and read this stuff more. But I like the myriad of ideas coming out. So the best ones sort of play into the floor in the Senate, and everybody can really sort through everything that's going to be coming at us on property tax issues. So with that, I'm in favor of moving this forward.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments, amendments? Seeing none. Judy, will you please call the roll? Or, yeah.
Senator French,
No.
Senator Ide,
Yes.
Senator McEwen,
No.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Chairman Biteman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, Senate File 90 has 3 ayes and 2 noes.
Thank you, sir. Senate File 90 has passed the Senate Revenue Committee. Next bill up for our consideration, the last one, I think it is, Senate File 125, property tax, limiting the maximum taxable value increase, sponsored by the good Senator Salazar. Senator Salazar, please come on down.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Get organized here for a minute. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I bring you Senate File 125, which is property tax limitation. This is a 3-page bill. It's a very simple bill. I brought this bill last year, and it failed. I'm bringing it back this year because to some extent the legislature has changed. But the reason this is being brought forward, as all of you know, is because our constituency are hurting. I have folks in Du Bois that are hurting and Riverton who are hurting because of the incredible increase in assessments for their property tax. And something needs to be done. And so I bring this bill. I put it before you. Let's go quickly through the 3 pages. This is an act related to an ad valorem taxation. Page 1 and page 2 is primarily the definitions. I would direct your attention though to page 3, line 1. And let me just read that because this is the meat of the bill. To secure a just valuation for taxation of property as required by the Wyoming Constitution, the taxable value of any property in the all other property, real and personal class, identified in paragraph A3 of Article 15, Section 11 of the Wyoming Constitution, and here's the key part, shall not increase in any one year by more than 5% from the taxable value of the property determined in the prior year. So basically what this does, Mr. Chairman, is it puts a cap on the assessment in any given 12-month period of no more than 5% increase. Now, having said that, let me make a couple comments. You're going to hear people, let me say this. Those who take in the money and those who spend the money will not support this bill, because what this bill does is put that money back into the pockets of your constituents. And I guess that's human nature. You are the state legislature. The other argument that you're going to hear about this bill, Mr. Chairman and members, is that this is unconstitutional. Let me address that specifically. I believe, from what I have deduced and what I've looked at, that this has not been widely interpreted by the courts in the context of this type of property tax. I would be more than willing to fight this or to propose the arguments that we could win in the courts with regard to this. And quite frankly, all of you know that the courts have been very unpredictable over the last 6 months with regard to their decisions. At the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, you are the state legislature, and you determine the policy of taxation in this state and the interpretation thereof. We have our views. Others have their views as to what would win in the courts. But does that mean that we don't act for our constituents? I don't think. I think we should act for our constituents. And I'm willing to argue this type of property tax limitation in the courts and a case to make a case to protect my constituents, to help them in this time where property tax assessments are going through the roof. I can only tell you that in my constituency, in places like Du Bois and Riverton, seniors on fixed incomes who have their property tax assessments going up in a 12-month period by over 25 or 30%, they're having to leave. They can't pay their taxes. They're having to leave and sell their homes. And they're crying out for help. And you are that help. So I ask you to think about that, to think about your constituents. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield to any questions.
Thank you, Senator Salazar. Committee, any questions for Senator Salazar? Yes, Senator French.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Salazar, have you evaluated the cost from going from 9.5 down to 5 on anybody that has a mill levy, like your local cemetery district, fire hall,
Right.
county? I know my county is at 12 mills, schools, hospital, everybody that has a mill. Have you evaluated the effect that
One of
this
the-
will have?
Senator Salazar?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, thank you for that question. Actually, the problem is that it's indeterminable because of the impact. The impact depends on actually the future market value increases of individual properties. So in any given period, depending on the market value, it could fluctuate. So it's hard. It's hard to get any type of accurate number. I have asked for LSO, but again, it's difficult when the evaluations fluctuate. So to that extent, it's indeterminable.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Salazar. So have you looked at, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat here. So if this was passed and it goes down to 5, have you, pardon? Caps the fair market. Doesn't change the taxation. Anyway, the value, the increased value from one year to the next at this cap.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Can you restate your question? Sorry.
Got too many voices in my head here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So if this goes through, how's it affected, like, this year, your property value, your house is valued at 500,000, next year, it's $650,000.
Right. Well, it would depend on what the specific property tax of what you're starting out at. This caps it at 5%. So depending on what your property value assessment is, this limits the increase to no more than 5%. It cannot go beyond 6%. And that's the whole point of this bill, Senator French, is that, as I say, there are a number of locations, particularly not only in my county, but other counties, where it's going up by 15, 20, 25%. And folks who have lived in those areas for over 20, 25 years are simply being pushed out because of that increase. The other thing I will mention, Mr. Chairman, is, and this was stated last year when those who objected to this bill testified, we need to pay for services in the county. We have to, we're at a level now where this tax needs to stay at its current level or higher to provide those services. My answer to you, the state legislature, is it's up to you to decide whether that should go to increased services or inflation, or it should go back to the people. And this is a fundamental policy decision by you 5 members. And it really gets back to our constituency wanting us to do something about increased property taxes. And you have the opportunity today to do something. And with regard to, I will say this again, with regard to the argument that this is unconstitutional, let's fight it. Let's give our best case in the courts. But at the end of the day, when you go back to your constituency, they're not going to ask you about your legal reasoning. What they're going to ask you is, did you do something to protect us from the increase of property taxes that are leading us to have to sell our homes? At the end of the day, that's you, because you are an equal member of our government. You are the legislative branch of the government. And I'm more than willing to make that case to the courts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ide has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming, Senator Salazar. Things going on in my head too, Senator French. Quick question. You reference in here the taxable value in sort of the definition of it, and you refer to all other property, real and personal, 9.5%. What I want to, my question is, does that include everything that's in our tax law where commercial, ag, and your personal residence are included in that 9.5%.
Correct, but this is,
Yeah,
yeah. Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, so this, if you look at page 3, line 3, it's all other property. And this is the category that it's in.
I'm sorry.
It's page 3,
Okay,
Senator Ide,
uh-huh,
line 3.
okay.
The taxable value of any property in the all other.
And that's it. You're
Yeah.
correct. Thank you.
Yep.
And that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. So if my house goes up in value 50%, the most my property tax can go up would be 5% in that year. Is that correct?
Correct,
Thank you,
in
Mr.
any,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, correct, in up to 5% in any 12-month period and no more. I know that some people have come to me and say, why 5%? Why not 3%? But it's a question of where do you want to go? But you know as well as I do the phone calls that we're all getting from people who are almost crying on the phone because they're going to have to move out of the house that they've lived in for 25 years because they can't afford the assessments. I had a phone call from an individual in my district who's having to leave, and last year they were under the burden of more food on the table versus preparing for the tax hike. They need something done by the state legislature.
Thank you, Senator. Stick around in case we have some questions for
Okay.
you, sir. All right. Anybody wish to testify? Anybody? Agency first, and then we'll go to our senior citizen from the Farm Bureau. So come on up. Sorry, can't resist. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back to Revenue. It's been a long time. I'm Ken Gill, the Laramie County Assessor here in Laramie County. Just a few comments on the bill here. One comment would be on page 2, line 8. That little M, that in statute is talking about telecoms. So we may need to fix that, or telecommunications. So that may be something that could be amended here, or maybe upstairs. My other thought as I was listening to this, bills that we've seen before, and I really don't want to talk about the constitutionality of a bill. I'm definitely not a lawyer. Bills that we've seen before were breaking out and creating a subclass like residential. And this one's not doing that. It's saying all other property. So all other property in a tier taxation state like Wyoming, we have minerals at 100%, industrial at 11.5%, and all other property at 9.5%. So all other is going to be agricultural property. It's going to be commercial property, residential property, whether it be vacant or improved. It's also going to include commercial business personal property. So that all others is covering all of those properties. So hopefully that helps Senator Ide's question there. So I think where it might get a little sticky will be the agricultural piece, because agricultural land is not valued at fair market value. It's valued at its ability to produce a product. So that might get a little shady there, but I mean, it still can be done. One thing I struggled with, these counties that don't have permits. So a house gets built and the county doesn't know about it. The assessor didn't find the house until they have made their 6-year rotation and the house has been there for 5 years. Currently in statute, the assessor can go back on omitted property for 5 years or the last owner change. So we can go back 5 years already, but I'm wondering how that cap will work from going back that 5 years, and then do we just cap it going forward to the current year? I'm not sure how that would work, but obviously, maybe the department could promulgate some rules around that. So another question that I had, or a comment, this is capping taxable value, okay? This isn't capping tax dollars. This is capping taxable value. That is different than tax dollars. In a county like ours, here, we have a bond that is a countywide bond. And what could happen is that you're freezing the property value or the taxable value, right? Within a reason of 5%. Well, those taxes could actually still go up because enough money needs to be paid for that bond. So just because the taxable value stays the same, the taxes still could go up depending on that bond obligation. And here it happens to be our community college. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the taxes won't go up. Now, I'm going to say it's probably going to be more minimal, but that mill levy actually could be higher for that bond repayment. I think that's all I had, and I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Welcome to Revenue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Committee, the Revenue Committee. I am all for doing some kind of tax break.
Sorry, introduce yourself, Mr. Meyer.
Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor.
Thank you.
I am all for trying to do something. I've been researching it for a year. I've given you guys lots of information on the 50 states and so forth. This one is interesting as far as we've been just talking about bringing out residential property, and this will be bringing out all of them. But the 5% isn't so bad. I just thought, I did a little study, everything except for personal property, and since 96, we've got residential property statewide has gone up 6.39% with a medium of 6-something% too. And ag and residential put together stuck around 6% for the average, 6% for the median. Residential and commercial, the same thing, around 7% for the average and 6.64%. And ag, residential, and commercial is at 6. So the total was 6.35% for the average, 5.86 for the median. So actually you could, and that's what we've been living on since 96 to 21 anyways. You know, I don't have 22 in here because that's when we really went up. We started going up in 21, but 22 is a bad year. And like everybody else, our taxes in Park County have soared. I mean, the average was 25%, but it was 25 to 45%. People were paying as much as $1,500 in 1 year for the increases. And the bad news is it's going up again. We're already averaging another 20% and so forth. And people are looking for something. And I go by the basis of when we've been living off an average of 6%, and that's with new construction, why do we have to continually go from 25 to 45%? And what are we doing with all that extra money anyways to run government? I know we always need money, but we are on a fixed rate state. When your value goes up, your taxes go up. I've talked about budget-based states. That's where you budget for your needs and you don't go up past there if it goes up 5% or down and so forth. Actually, on a budget-based state though, if everything falls apart, they can raise your mill levy up and your tax rate to get you that budget. But when it goes down, you don't get that in you don't get to throw the money in the bank because that's taxpayers' money. So that's what I'm saying. We would have a hard time in Wyoming going to a budget-based system. Unfortunately, the biggest thing would be oil and gas production. It's at 100%. You drop mills, you're going to lose money. You know, you raise mills, well, we can't raise mills because we're on a limit. And as you all know, pretty much everybody budgets for their max. Nobody takes under, very seldom unless you're in one of those billion-dollar counties. So what I'm saying, and this could work, you know, I don't know about doing it to all 4 classes of property. I was more or less working on the residential, which we were told by LSO that that would take a constitutional change to be done in 2024. Now, we could test that, I guess, if you wanted to, but we've got a lot of bills out there, as you know, for a constitutional amendment that can't even take place till November of 2024. So this wouldn't even go in place till 2025. But I'm not against this bill. I think we have a lot more out there to discuss as well, to see which one is good. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Meyer. Certainly a cap is one arrow in the quiver. The other would obviously be just to lower the rate from 9.5% to whatever we want to, correct? That would be a more immediate fix.
Mr. Chairman, that still takes a constitutional change as well, as far as lowering the rate down, as far as I saw, because both of those bills, even to lower the rate, are taking a constitutional change, because at this time it says you have to value everything at full market value. Now, the only thing about lowering the rate is some counties are not feeling this kind of effect. But so they actually need that money. So if you lower the rate from 9.5 to 8.5, you're saving people about $230, you know, all the way to 7.5, $450. When you had tax in our county, that wouldn't even be a good Band-Aid, because they're going up $1,200 and $1,500. And by the time we got to that, now, if that didn't take a constitutional change, which right now that's House Joint 2, that's what that's saying. And that is saying that we need a constitutional change to be able to change that rate.
That's news to me. The legislature set that rate. I would assume the legislature can adjust that rate. But that's for another day. That's not on the topic
Okay.
of this bill. But any questions for Mr. Meyer? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other, we'll go to Mr. Ryman and then our old pal. Get close so you can hear us. Mr. Ryman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeremiah Reeman here on behalf of the
Reeman,
Wyoming
sorry.
County Commissioners Association. Mr. Chairman, I might just start with your last question. It is within your constitutional power to go from 9.5% down to as low as 7.5%. Under the Constitution, you can be within 4 percentage points of the industrial category. Right now, we're 2 below that. You could go below that to 7.5. So I just want to make sure that you know that we certainly believe that that's constitutional, and I think your attorneys have advised that during this interim. Mr. Chairman, I'm a little disappointed that counties are cast as greedy in this conversation. You know, just like you, we're being asked to provide services. And as some of you saw this morning, on a 12 mil, the average $300,000 home is paying about $225 for services at the county level. I certainly think I get $225 worth of services from the county. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to hit on a couple of things. The constitutionality. I'm not an attorney. I'm not here to suggest one way or the other than to say, during the interim, your attorneys, the Legislative Service Office, indicated to all of us through a memo that there is a strong argument of violation with this sort of an approach. So that's your attorneys, not mine. And I'd hope we don't have to go to the courts over that. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just hit on the fiscal impact of this sort of a thing. Your office, again, indicated that with a 5% cap from 1993 to 2021, it would have resulted in a cumulative $3.88 billion tax decrease in the aggregate. For some context, that's $660 million decrease to counties. And that equates to $23.6 million a year. That's $5 million more than you're providing to counties on an annual basis through direct distribution. And it's already a battle for us to have a conversation over direct distribution, although I'm very appreciative of the additional support we've been able to receive from the legislature over the course of the past couple of years. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just provide a little bit more context on this in terms of what assessed valuation under the all other category means to your counties. Currently, and this is from fiscal year 21, 19 of the counties depend on that all other category for 25% or more of their budget. 12 of those counties, that equates to more than 50% of their budget. This is important. If you take out the other elements and just left residential, which this bill does not, there would be 17 of the counties are over 25%, and 5 of them are over 50% just from residential. I'll just use one quick example. Washakie County in its fiscal year 21 budget, they have a budget of about $6 million a year for all the services that they provide. Payment in lieu of taxes, which is the federal government's contribution to them for the federal land and minerals that they have in their county, equates to 13% of their budget. Direct distribution, another 12%. Neither of those are ever guaranteed in any one particular year, and they're dependent on that for 25% of their budget. You add in property tax, that's an additional 18%. That's 43% of their total budget come from those three sources. So this does mean something to many of your local governments. Mr. Chairman, I provided an analysis to the Revenue Committee on a 3% evaluation during the November meeting. I want to talk about that really quickly. What I did is I went back and I looked at assessments from 2019 to 2022, looked at actual, and what's kind of neat about that particular analysis is that we've actually come to a point where residential almost meets minerals, which from my perspective means we've got a little bit more diversified tax base, which we've all been looking for. I took that and then said, okay, what happens if we apply that 3% assessment limitation? Now, this does it a little bit differently through a taxable value, but nonetheless, I think the concept will kind of bear some fruit to analyze it. I kept the 2019 actuals and then ran it on a 3% maximum increase. And what happened is that the assessment valuation went down by $1.6 billion, or about 15% of our total valuation during that period. And what we also saw is that we became 3% more dependent on minerals. I don't know if that's exactly entirely what we want to do, but that was the analysis. And then I said, okay, what happens if we had a situation where we dropped 3% in a fiscal year? Because this only says we can't go up. It doesn't say we can't go down. And so I said, okay, what happens if we went from 2019 down 3% and then climbed back out at 3%? What would that look like? Well, the first thing I would tell you is it took 3 years to get back out of the hole and get back to your 2019 figure. That's a little bit problematic for some of your governments. Assessed valuations went down $2.6 billion, or roughly 24% of the total. That's big dollars when we're trying to fund our schools and local governments. And we became even more dependent. We became 3% more dependent on minerals in that scenario. So these things do matter as we go forward. You heard the Laramie County Assessor talk about bonds and shifting and what this all means. What it really means at the end of the day is that we end up having to shift that burden to pay those bonds to our mineral producers who are paying a lot of our way. These assessment caps do exist in other states. We're completing an analysis. We're not done. We've only found one state that does it, that doesn't also have an income tax, and that state is Texas. So that's one of their mechanisms for making up things. I heard some conversation about budgeting and budgeting for needs. I can tell you, and I suspect you can talk to your commissioners and they'd concur, they're budgeting for needs. They're not looking to be greedy and go and grab as much money as possible. They're like you and exactly doing what you are doing. When times are a little good, they're taking care of deferred maintenance and they're putting a little bit of that aside for when things aren't bad. And we do have those periods. We were just near that and having conversations about whether we should change our assessment up a little bit to make up for that. So again, we're no different than you. This is something that we strongly oppose, and I'm sorry, I cannot find a way on how to get to a yes on this concept. I want to, but I can't. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Ryman, I don't believe I have disparaged the counties. I don't
Mr.
believe
Chairman,
I said that the counties were greedy. I don't believe I've said that.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, I did not say any of you did. I felt that the presenter of the bill cast that as a little bit relative to our interests in this.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Question for you, going back to the budgeting and the cap and that conversation, specifically to the former Representative Schwartz, when he mentioned that in Teton County, some taxes went up 200% plus. Did the budgetary needs of Teton County go up 200%? And I would imagine the answer is no. And what this bill, I believe, is getting at is giving those property owners some sort of relief and predictability in the future, that they know they're not going to see that sticker shock again of a 200% increase. What are your thoughts on that argument?
Mr. Chairman, certainly understand that particular situation, and I do think we need to design mechanisms to take care of those particular instances. The problem we have here is that Teton County, those liberal bastions, they have the lowest mill levy of the counties in this state. They assess just over 7 mills of the 12 that are available to them. So they're not trying to gouge anything here. They're simply trying to provide those services, and they have continuously adjusted down as necessary. We can't account for the fact that there are other elements of this situation in terms of the school mills as one example. The other thing that's completely out of our control are the assessments. We have a uniform system, and Teton County is a very attractive place. You can only develop in 3% of the county there, and home values have simply skyrocketed. The interest there, it exists. As you may have read in some reports, it is the highest median income in the entire country by over $100,000 higher. And guess what? 70% of that's from investment income. So this isn't just people working in the community. We do need to develop systems and make sure that we provide relief in those areas and make sure we can keep people in the community. But I would just attest that it's not because Teton County is trying to gouge. Again, they by far have the lowest mill assessment, at least for the county mill assessment.
sorry, let's get to, any more questions for Mr. Reaman? Okay, Cindy Delancey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. And I just wanted to chime in on this and just draw your attention back to the fiscal note associated with this bill. I completely understand Senator Salazar's desire and the sincerity in his voice to come down here and ask you to do something for for your constituents. I'm just not sure that this is it, in the sense of when you read the fiscal note, we really don't know what we're doing, in the sense that right from the language from the fiscal note, the fiscal impact is indeterminable. We don't really understand the far-reaching consequences if we were to pass legislation of this nature. And so, doing something, I think everyone's constituency in Wyoming is hoping that to do something is based in reason and logic and solid in what we're doing. So, with that, I also do, just agree that with you, Mr. Chairman, in the sense that no matter where you come down in this scenario, I think we're all looking for that relief to be predictable and understandable. And again, as I just referenced back to the fiscal note, the indeterminable outcomes if something like this legislation were to go forward, I feel that to Senator Ide's comments earlier, that there's plenty more trains about to leave the station, perhaps for analysis that we might have a little bit more clarity and understanding of the far-reaching consequences and to all the different taxpayers of Wyoming. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I just, speaking as a taxpayer, hearing the testimony from Mr. Reaman about, $300,000 house receiving about $225 a year in governmental services under our current tax scenario, I just kind of want to bring it into context, like that's less than my monthly cable bill. So I just ask that the committee continue to evaluate other options as we go forward, and just that desire to have some certainty and predictability is the ask from the business community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delancey. Any questions? Thank you. Now to you, sir. Mr. Moline, what say you?
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting firm in support of this bill. I realize there is constitutional questions. Those will have to be answered. This fits right in with my members' policy, having a cap. We're not looking at decreasing the amount of tax that's being paid. It's to put a cap on the increase. It will still increase up to 5%. We hear about what residential property, how that's escalated in the last few years. We're facing the same thing. Perhaps not this year. I haven't seen the figures yet, but we faced this in the agricultural valuation. In 2 years, irrigated land went up 45%. It's based on the price of output. So we faced this before. It hurts. This also affects the residential rate. The residential valuation increases also affects my members. Our residences are paid on market value. Well, I want to say this will not impact on how properties are valued. It will not impact on how agricultural land is valued. We're going to value it the same way. We're going to evaluate commercial and residential the same way. What this bill does is it puts a cap on how much it can increase every year of 5%. With that, Mr. Chairman, sitting firmly in support of this bill, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to Ms. Bachesky. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. Janine Bayteski from Teton County, just to address the conversation about Teton County and what they're doing with the money. Please keep in mind that we send over $50 million of residential and commercial property taxes back to the state for redistribution as a recapture district for our schools. So that's indeed a big chunk of the money that you're talking about here.
Thank you. Any questions for our witness who's walking away? Okay. Looks like Mr. Obermueller is interested in speaking. Come on down. What's that? Yeah, I told the majority floor leader we may be late because he only gave us an hour, so we've got important work to do. So let's do a good job and vet these bills and work them as best we can, and we'll take all the testimony that's available.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time then. Pete Obermueller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, let me just first say that in 2021, oil and gas industry contributed to the state about $1.67 billion in taxes. Of that, approximately 581 million of it was from property taxes. By far and away, oil and gas and coal right behind it provide the lion's share of property tax. 54% of all property tax paid statewide is paid by the minerals industry. You all know, I think you understand that property tax for mineral purposes, the minerals is valued at 100% of the value. And then the mills are applied to 100% of the value, as opposed to 11.5% on industrial, which PS is largely made up of oil and gas infrastructure. So when you talk about industrial, you're talking basically about oil and gas as well, among some others, but it's largely oil and gas. And then all other. You have residential, but in that property is commercial as well, which includes, of course, your mom and pop shops in all of our towns, but it also includes places like Walmart and Microsoft and Home Depot and those sorts of places. So it's a challenging question for us because we look at it under the context of how much we pay and how much we carry the load for the state with respect to property tax. Also in the context of what you're hearing from your constituents regarding their residential property taxes, and we understand that. So and we think that there are avenues to deal with that issue that don't drive that divide between what everyone else pays and what minerals pay even further apart, like this bill would do. So let me talk for a minute about the constitutionality of it, because Petroleum Association of Wyoming plays some part in that, probably a pretty big part. I won't go too deep into it, but just a little bit into it. The Petroleum Association, along with Mining Association and some other associations back in the 1980s, filed a lawsuit that led to the tiered system we have today. Because at the time, wildly, this was not all that long ago, the taxation valuation was determined all over the map, all over the board. People in exactly the same businesses were paying different property tax rates at the time because valuation was so different. And let me just read, I'm just going to read to you about 2 sentences from our argument to the Supreme Court that ultimately prevailed. For many properties, the board, at the time, the Board of Equalization is the one that said it, not the legislature. Interesting. We overturned that as well in this, but that's a side note. Now it is in your wheelhouse is where it should be. So they're referring to the Board of Equalization here. The board would arrive at an assessed value by taking the prior year's assessment and adding 25% of the current value of new property additions. For companies adding considerable new plant, this meant that most of their property was being assessed at 25% of current costs, while others at 25% of 1967 costs. Here's why this is important. Mixing of base year and current year assessment practices led to ever-increasing discrepancies in equalization, primarily due to the department's continued use of a base year concept. As a result, by 1980, virtually every assessed property was assessed at a different proportion of market value than every other assessed property. That's what we were trying to correct for. And unfortunately, well-intentioned as though it may be, this bill puts us back in that path, and here's why. What the Supreme Court said is you have 3 layers. You have the market value, that's the top. Everybody must be assessed on that. Then the legislature has the ability to set the assessment value ratios underneath that, 9.5, 11.5, what you talked about earlier, Sharon. And then you have the mills that are applied. That's the 3rd level, those 3 levels. As long as everyone is treated equally at that top level, then you're fine within some reason in the other two to take action. When you institute a cap like this, what happens over time is within the same class, you start to erode the top market value. So, Mr. Chairman, if Senator McKeon has, a $200,000 property and in year one, then he's assessed at about $19,000. And then, based on area situation in his area, it doesn't really go up in assessed value, or it goes up very little. Then you don't hit the cap. You still pay 9.5% on your 200,000 property. Meanwhile, Senator French, because everyone wants to, was really inspired by Kanye West and wants to move and live near Senator French, all of a sudden his property value was 200,000. It goes up to 300,000. He should be assessed at the 28,500, but he's not. He can only have a $950 increase from the year before. So now Senator McKeon and Senator French are in the same class, and they're not treated equally. It erodes the market value because Senator French is no longer paying on his market value. That's precisely what the Supreme Court ruled in this case. So, all that said, I appreciate Senator Salazar's willingness to fight and go to court and all that. That's great and perfectly fine. The question I have for you is why, when you have other options coming forward that can take care of what Senator Salazar is talking about, and it's real that there are people hurting, and through refund programs and other ideas, you can get cash back in their hands this year without going down this path of trying to divide the taxpayers again in Wyoming and drive that apart even more between minerals and what everybody else pays. Mr. Chairman, that's a lot of indulgence for me. I appreciate you. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate the thorough testimony and explanation, Mr. Oberman. Any questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete, good to see you here today.
Thank you.
The takeaway for me on you're with the Petroleum Association. Obviously, you're advocating for their interests, no question. I mean, I get that. Everybody should. Do you have any suggestions how you treat minerals and royalties different than all other classes of property? That's just a short question.
Mr. Chairman, it's a short question with maybe a long answer.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure I know what you're asking. You're asking what should we do about the taxes we pay in terms of the rate or whatever? Yeah, so there's lots of conversation about that, and I think this committee will probably discuss some other bills that would impact ours and lower it in that way. The question from the broader question, the way we've looked at it from a statewide policy, yeah, the Petroleum Association of Wyoming, but we also we're the Petroleum Association for Wyoming. We want Wyoming to succeed as well. So when we're looking at it from a long-term perspective about what our revenue base is, making sure that we keep all these classes and treat people equally is very, very important. So under this, it's not about whether ours goes down, quite frankly. There are others that are about that. So we've had bills before that deals with severance tax and price triggers on those. I think there's some that'll be in front of your committee with respect to personal property tax and others. But what I've said to my members often is it's very difficult for our slice of the pie to shrink so long as the pie is almost entirely made up by us. So that's why that leads us to weigh into sort of tax policy writ large, where maybe we wouldn't have done that before.
All right.
Thank you,
Sounds
Mr.
good.
Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else in the room wish to testify? Not seeing any. What about Zoom, Judy? Mr. Walzak, go ahead if you can hear us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jared Walzak. I'm Vice President of State Projects with the Tax Foundation. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this bill. The Tax Foundation's had the privilege of testifying previously in Wyoming, and we've talked with lots of states about tax reform and tax relief, and we generally like tax relief when that can be provided. We do, however, have some concerns about the approach here. This is, of course, an assessment limit. And as you've had discussion, there are 3 different ways that states can limit the growth of property taxes. Those are levy limits, rate limits, and assessment limits. And the challenge, as you've heard with an assessment limit, is that it distorts property tax markets, and it can create situations where fairly similar properties are being taxed at fundamentally different rates. This is particularly deleterious for new construction, and that really hurts new homeowners, younger homeowners. It also creates a lock-in effect where individuals who are currently incumbent homeowners don't have as much of an incentive to maybe renovate their home, to make changes to their home, to downsize if they no longer need the space, or to upgrade to another home, because the age of the home becomes one of the most significant factors. This approach, this assessment limit approach, is essentially borrowing from something that began with California in Proposition 13. And again, that too was well-intentioned, and it's worked in the sense that it's kept incumbent property tax owners, property owners' taxes in check. But it comes with those hidden costs of all of that discouragement. It makes it less attractive for growing families to move from starter homes. It interferes with changes to a property's use. And there's this issue of fundamental fairness. A house's fair market value ceases to be the main driver of its local property tax bill. The owner of a modest new home can pay more in property taxes than a next-door neighbor with an older, much more luxurious home. Assessments limits are intended to constrain incidental tax increases that are driven not by conscious policy, but by rising home values. And you have good reason to be concerned about this. Home prices appear to be up about 34% in Wyoming over the past 3 years. And of course, you know that for some people, it's significantly more than that, maybe multiple times that. A few homeowners feel like they're getting 34% more or better services from local governments. Even after you take inflation into account, housing's of course about 1/3 of the inflation calculation, this is a significant increase in local government revenue without a commensurate increase in the cost of providing local government services. There's good reason to be concerned about these issues, to want to address them, but this may not be the best approach. A better approach could be a levy limit, closer to what a bill that was set on the table for today, SF 104, is trying to accomplish. I think there's issues with the specifics of that bill as well. If a levy limit were to be adopted, I'd advise it not be quite as strict, or that it don't use a statewide growth factor to roll back local level levies. It probably also should exclude new construction from the cap and address either inflation or population adjustments, so that you don't have a situation where population growth, especially for school purposes, leads to a decline in per capita or per unit collections. But that idea, at least, the idea of a levy limit, has advantages over an assessment limit because it doesn't distort property taxes in the same way. It doesn't create a lock-in effect, doesn't create the unfairness. It doesn't discourage taxpayers from putting their property to its highest and best use. Finally, one other ramification, Wyoming, by foregoing income taxes, devolves more responsibility to local government than you'd find in some peer states. Localities have both property and local sales tax authority, and there's good reason to be concerned about the rise of property tax burdens, especially in recent years. But limitations need to be understood in the context and tempered by the understanding that property tax is a relatively economically efficient tax, and that it's an extremely important part of Wyoming's tax revenue system. Again, I think the intentions here are right. We've actually urged a lot of states to adopt some sort of property tax limitation, especially given the dramatic rise in assessed values that are out of proportion to what residents are getting out of the taxes they're paying. But there's good reason to be cautious and to think perhaps more in terms of capping at the local level the total amount of revenue increase, rather than freezing individual parcels at a particular assessed amount and only allowing them to rise in a certain way. If one property suddenly has dramatically more value, you may not want it to increase its tax burden by that much, but you'd like it to float with other properties so that there's still an appropriate ratio based on value and property tax payments. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Walzak. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, is that it, Judy? All right, public comment, or Senator Salazar, do you want to bring us home, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to get one thing clear. I never used the word greedy, and I strongly object to that misinterpretation. I never used it, and I want the record to show that I never used that word greedy. Finally, I would say this, Mr. Chairman and members, and I go to Senator Ide's comment. You know, we have advocates for all types of interests here. But I would say to you that the greatest advocate for our constituents is you. They put us here in this position in the Senate. And today, in this room, you get to decide. You get to decide. And you are the advocate for your constituents. They're working today. They can't be here. You're their representative. And they're crying out for help. And I know all of you know that because you talk to your constituents throughout the year. I ask you to pass this bill and send a message that we are willing to help our constituents who are struggling to pay their property taxes. And this is an alternative to help them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Okay, thank you, sir. All right, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
I move.
Moved by Senator Ide. Seconded by Senator French. Any amendments? Any comments on the bill? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There again, don't want to repeat myself too much, but we're going to see a lot of these. And I want to speak in favor of Senator Salazar's bill here, just for the fact that he is working for his constituents, and we need to flesh all of these bills out, I think, to see which one's best. I mean, we're a small body, but we can get it to the final decision makers. And I like this bill for the fact that it's simple, it's short, gets to the point. It includes, you know, all other property where a lot of them are just targeting residential. And there's a lot of, you know, Main Street properties down there that are getting beat up just as bad as the homeowners are. So with that, I'm in favor of this bill.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, a lot of good arguments today. I appreciate that. But the people out there, especially in the western part of the state, northwest part of the state, other areas of the state, are really struggling. And, you know, you got to look at it this way. Many of the people that are now on a fixed income, they've retired, they bought their home a long time ago for maybe $20,000. Now it's valued at $300,000, $400,000. They have a real struggle trying to pay that bill. And these very people are the ones that paid taxes for 40, 50 years. They helped build the local hospitals, the cemeteries, the fire halls. They helped develop these communities into what they are. And many of them, with these high valuations, are being forced out of the very communities that they helped build. And it's not right. And so I support this bill, like I believe Senator Ide or somebody said there'll be many of them coming down the line. And we'll see which ones make it through. But we have to do something, folks. We've got to do something. These people are struggling out there, you know, paying 40, 50, 80% increase in 1 year. They can't sustain that. They're going to be forced out. They may have to sell their house. Yeah, they'll get some money on their house, but they're going to have to move to a community that they don't know nobody in the community. So it's just not right. This is a good start. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, I do. I also believe we need to do something, but frankly, in my opinion, it's not this bill. I think this is bad tax policy. and I know my good friend, Senator Salazar very well, and he's got a good heart, and I understand what he's trying to do for his people. But I really see huge unintended consequences in this bill. And I'm afraid, we pass something like this, we're going to come to regret it. And as you said, there are many other instruments out there. Certainly the bill that Senator Case just brought forth before us. There's other ways we can address it. I just don't think this is the way. So I'll be a no vote on this bill.
Thank you, sir. Anything? All right. Well, I won't belabor the point by bloviating my opinion, but I do agree with Senator Ide. This isn't the only horse to ride here. We'll trust the process. We'll push bills through that the whole body can vet. And because property tax reform is probably the number one issue that we face this year, and we want to get it right. We want to make sure that the members have a crack at these bills as well. So I'll be a yes on this. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Chairman Beckman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there were 4 ayes and 1 no on Senate File 125.
All right, Senate File 125 has passed the Revenue Committee. Any other business of the Revenue Committee before we adjourn? Okay.